Behold! The sword of power. Excalibur.
Welcome to the Oh Gosh Oh Golly Oh Wow podcast, the podcast where we talk about the Marvel Comics series Excalibur and nothing but Excalibur every week for 126 plus weeks. This week in episode 21, we're in flashback mode with Excalibur number 20, The Eye of the Beholder, which is a fill-in issue set prior to the Cross-Time Caper. It is also the first issue of Excalibur not written by Chris Claremont. The creative team is Michael Higgins on writing, Ron Lim on pencils, Joe Rubenstein on inks, Glynis Oliver on colors, Augustin Mass on lettering, and Terry Kavanagh on editing.
Excalibur! Into the spine of the dragon! The sword! The land!
Yes, Merlin, that's it. Set the world to rights. Call the dragon. Mend the sword. Speak the charm of making.
We are joined this week by a very dear friend of mine who I know is going to have a lot of thoughts and fun with this very wacky issue, who I will introduce in a moment. But first, your equally dear hosts. I am Dr. Anna Papard. I talk and write and occasionally tweet about superheroes and comics and pop culture and representation. I am the editor of an award-winning book called Supersex, Sexuality, Fantasy, and the Superhero, which is a hopefully useful line on my CV as I continue to pursue official employment as Kurt Wagner's PR manager. I am joined, as always, by Mav. Take it away.
Hi, my name is Christopher Maverick, but you can call me Mav. I'm many things. I'm the host of another podcast, Vox Popcast, where we talk about pop culture issues and sex and gender and race and how all that runs together. I'm a lifelong comic fan. I'm a PhD student. I'm an adjunct instructor at Mount Aloysius College and at Duquesne University, both in Pennsylvania. And I'm very tired now because starting this week, we are back to having summer school in session. And it's weird because our listeners, I don't know if they know that we record these out of order sometimes. So it's entirely possible that, in fact, probable that I'm going to sound way more alert on next week's show when I was still on vacation than I do on this week's show where I'm exhausted. But that's how it is. That's it's time travel that happens in podcasting and in cross-time capers, which this is not. I thought we were going to do the Crusader X today. That's what last issue said. Last issue said it would be Crusader X.
We've already recorded Crusader X. We don't have to do it again.
I know, but last issue 19 says next week or next month is Crusader X, and it's not.
I know, and then we got this issue instead, which raises questions about where it fits historically as a fill-in. But we'll talk about it. Andrew, take it away.
I'm Andrew DeMann. I'm a lecturer at St. Jerome's University. I'm the project lead for the Claremont run. I'm the co-host of Three Panel Contrast, another podcast. And I don't like this issue because I like Meggan, and we'll probably talk about that.
We will talk about that. We will talk about that with you, Andrew, president of the Fans of Meggan fan club.
It's just me. I'm also the only member, so.
That's not true. I like Meggan a lot.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. So we are joined, as I mentioned, by a very dear friend who I've been wanting to have on the pod since the beginning, and we finally found a good spot for her. We are thrilled to welcome Dr. Asha Jeffers. Welcome, Asha.
Happy to be here.
Asha's research and teaching specialties are 20th and 21st century literature and cultural production. She's an assistant professor at Dalhousie University, cross-appointed in the Gender and Women's Studies program. Her research focuses on literature about the children of immigrants, the second generation across national and ethnic lines. She's particularly interested in how second-generation literature mobilizes the conventions of coming-of-age narratives, the relationship between myth, memory, and history, and the representation of intergenerational and intragenerational relationships to produce future-facing stories that suggest hope and possibility in trying times. Asha, I know that you're also an X-Men fan. I know that you're a fan of X-Men the animated series in particular. So I want to hear a little bit about your X-Men origin story. And I know you've dabbled in comics a little bit too, but I'm assuming right at the moment that this is your first issue of Excalibur.
Yes, it is definitely my first issue of Excalibur. I did not know it existed until you told me about it. So most of my kind of superhero history is through TV show and film. I never super got into superhero comics in their actual original comic form, but I'm a big fan of all of the various other permutations. So yes, I am a big devotee of X-Men the Animated Series. I watched it all the time when I was a kid. I've rewatched it 1.5 times as an adult. So, and I mean, I think that at the time when that series was airing, I was the prime age for it. I also think that like the X-Men as a team has a lot of appeal to young people in general. I'm also Black. I grew up in a home that had a framed picture of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King shaking hands prominently displayed in our dining room. So
I know that picture. I know exactly what that picture looks like. Did you have a Black Jesus?
We did not have a Black Jesus.
Oh, you're missing out.
But yeah, so the Professor X Magneto tension, friendship situation, I think that resonated in an interesting sort of way with my world as a child. I think also, like many a small Black girl, I was very, very like happy about the existence of Storm, and she seemed very cool. I think, and this is something that Anna and I have talked about a bunch of times, who you relate to versus who you think is cool in a given media property, because I don't think that as a child I related to Storm. She was much too poised for my scrappy self to particularly identify with, but I was a big fan.
Other favorite characters from that series or subsequent interpretations? I'm sort of curious about whether you're familiar with any of the characters that we have in Excalibur.
Yeah, I mean, I was a big, like many a child as well, Wolverine fan. I also remember quite liking Gambit, although upon rewatching that series as an adult, different feelings. I mean,
I like how we all devolved into laughter because we know exactly what you mean. I was like, a little creepy as an adult, but yeah.
There's some light stalking going on, yeah.
Various shades of stalking throughout. I mean, and as an example of being someone who primarily watched the TV version as opposed to reading the comics, Jubilee was a character I really like, and I mean, she was a character who was specifically created for 90s kids to relate to, so it worked. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the Excalibur characters, the only one I was really familiar with was your beloved Kurt.
Yeah.
So, I feel honor bound to mention on this podcast that the very first day I met Anna, I met her in a class, and after that class, I texted my friend to say, I'm in class with a girl who dresses like a superhero. And this was entirely before knowing what she studied.
I mean, I buy it. Andrew, are you surprised at all? I'm not surprised at all.
I hope it was like body armor and like really weirding out the campus.
Well, I used to wear, like, especially when I was in grad school, like I feel like my standard uniform was spandex disco pants from American Apparel and tank tops, and that was like my go-to. I remember I started wearing the American Apparel spandex as a Sue Storm Halloween costume, and it eventually just like, I just got more and more colors of it, and it made it into my regular wardrobe and became kind of my look. So like, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
I'm a little sad there was no Kate. I mean...
I do have at least one cape that I used to wear with tights and shorts, and then it was sort of a 60s cape with a little hood on it. It was super cute. Yeah, I got all
It's
this
gonna
stuff.
be one of those episodes, so so the listeners know where we're at here.
Anyway, I appreciate that memory. I'm honored by that memory. I want to get into some of your first impressions of this particular issue, but I think we'll do our little summary and come back to it because I know we're all going to have some maybe strong first impressions about this issue, and I'm going to stand up for it just a little bit, so you can look forward to that. But let's get through the summary and we'll come back to it. So, as always, thanks to all the lovely listeners reading along with the pod, and I'm going to resist the urge to apologize for the plot summary this time and just get into it. We begin our tale on Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh, Scotland, where a pair of tourists are taking photographs of the castle until suddenly there's an earthquake. As the couple fights with each other, they begin to glow until they're enveloped by a yellow substance that cools to form stone. Then other stones appear, opening a stone circle that allows none other than the Demon Druid to arrive on Earth. Meanwhile, at the Excalibur Lighthouse, which we haven't seen in a long time in this comic, Kurt is trying to console Meggan, who's very upset over Brian's general Brianness. This is from the period where he was having an affair with Courtney, although I believe this is actually sadder Courtney in this issue. Meggan does some tearful shapeshifting before lashing out at Kurt. She calls him a monster, and it's completely heartbreaking. In London, Brian is seen seeking solace with the aforementioned sadder Courtney. Meggan, flying overhead, sees them together, which doesn't improve her mood. She keeps flying all the way to Edinburgh, where she encounters the Demon Druid. She turns into Godzilla to fight him, but he quickly takes control of her. Elsewhere, Rachel and Kitty are enjoying a night out on the town. After they discover the bar, they were heading to less than the stuff of their dreams. They see an unnatural glow over Arthur's Seat and head off to investigate. Kitty defeats Demon Druid by phasing through him, which frees Meggan and the tourists. Demon Druid disappears and everything is solved. Or is it? Back at the lighthouse, everyone has an unsettled night. Meggan's pining for Brian, Kurt's pining for Meggan, and Kitty, always one to look a gift horse in the mouth, stays up late tinkering, trying to figure out what exactly happened at Arthur's Seat. She falls asleep at her desk, but Brian, getting a rare chance to show off his scientific know-how, finishes her mysterious project for her. In the light of day, they find out that the Demon Druid is now feeding off the cooling towers at the Darkmoor Nuclear Research Facility and using that energy to build a new stone circle. Brian flies off to stop him, leaving the rest of the team relying on Kurt to teleport them to the scene, along with Kitty's untested gadget. Rachel prevents Brian from attacking the Druid so that Kitty can tell him her plan. She uses Widget to open a dimensional portal and convinces the Demon Druid to depart peacefully for his own world instead of destroying theirs. As he leaves, the team celebrates their bloodless victory and reprimands Brian. Okay, so I actually, as I said, have kind of an affection for this issue. Like, there's definitely stuff to criticize, especially the portrayal of Meggan, and we will talk about it. But it's got for me a little bit of like an early Excalibur greatest hits feel to it, which I feel like 20 issues in, I'm almost nostalgic for that. We have been on the Cross-Time caper for a while. But we can talk about some more of my feelings about it. I want to get back to... Okay, I know. But I want to get to...
first.
I want to get to Asha's first impressions first, and then you can rake me over the coals, Andrew, I promise. So Asha, just in general, you're jumping in here as your first issue of Excalibur. We don't have a regular artist. We don't have a regular writer. It's going to be, although that's not really going to make a big impression on you since it's your first issue, but just in general, did this issue make any sense to you? And did you enjoy this issue, like, at all?
So I did enjoy it. Also, it frequently didn't make any sense to me. I appreciated that it had a spirit of adventure, a spirit of randomness, it felt like to me.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning, I was a little bit worried that I wouldn't like it because the kind of diving directly into Meggan's seeming body issues, which I didn't have context for, I was a bit like, oh, is this going to be tiresome? But as one, because I did some Googling and I got better context for where Meggan's coming from, and that helped me understand the issue a lot better. So, the lack of context definitely did play a role in my initial reaction to it. But also, I think that rather than coming across, as I read on, it stopped coming across as like, oh, girl feels she's not pretty, to more of an understanding of Meggan having what I like to call Groucho Marx syndrome.
Okay.
like the idea that she doesn't want to be in any clubs that will have her. So, you know, the way that her own ambivalence about her mutanthood affects her relationships with other people, that actually did end up being very interesting to me in a much more fulsome way than I initially thought it was going to.
Yeah, well, I mean, I probably should let Andrew respond to this and then come back to some other first impressions, because I know that you want to talk about the issues that you have with Meggan here, Andrew. And yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so like I think there's a value to this.
Wow.
I've designed a few courses over the course of my career. And one of the courses that I haven't actually tried to put forth in front of an undergraduate committee is a course on bad books. But I think every English major should read bad books and just like read a bunch of like Goosebumps and Harlequin and stuff like that. Because all we ever look at is the good books. And I think you need the contrast, right? And I'm getting that here. This is season 5 of X-Men, the animated series, to speak in Ash's language or frame of reference. It's not good. To speak in Anna's sort of frame of reference there, this isn't like going to see the old Excalibur you knew and love. This is a cover band. It's all the things that are sort of Excalibur on the surface, with all the underlying character dynamics and tensions and complexities and nuances stripped away. And nowhere is that more evident than with Meggan, who is a deeply symbolic character that can really, really speak to the issue of like toxic relationships. And here it's a one-note stereotype that denies her all agency that she might have otherwise built in earlier issues. But as I said, there's a positive there, because that kind of, I don't know, foregrounds to me how subtle and delicate Meggan is as a character to write, even so much so that Claremont doesn't always pull it off. But when he does, wow, I love the metaphors that she engages with. And here we're not getting that. We're getting this very superficial version that is kind of antithetical to what she is, in my perspective, at least.
You didn't have any feelings about, I like that she yells at Kurt here, and that's not something she does elsewhere, and I actually really like that scene.
I don't believe it, scene.
Yeah, I mean,
so I have feelings about it too. I would like that she yelled at Kurt if there were a character so this story, as best I can tell, happens sometime around, I'm gonna say Excalibur 9-10, somewhere in there.
Yeah,
It's before the cross time caper, but after they have Widget, which is like a period of like a week in their lives. The fact that Widget's activated here is weird, and he shouldn't be. I don't know. So, but like just trying to place it in there. Meggan, the person who existed at that point in her history, does not have the moral fiber to yell at Kurt. She barely has the moral fiber to, say, I'm sad to Brian. It would be interesting. I mean, so Anna, you just said she never does it again, right? And that would make it interesting if there were a point where Meggan, who is, a woman in an abusive relationship, frankly, and, but trying to make it work. Her upstairs roommate has a crush on her, and he's her friend, but then he's been hitting on her, and then she just has too much. It's enough, and she blows up at him. There's character development there. I would love to see that. But since this is a fill-in issue, that's never mentioned again. So let's not worry about it. It's an interesting character, but it's not the character of Meggan that we've had thus far. And that makes it weird for me in a way that, Andrew, you said a lot. You said it was, well, Anna called it greatest hits. I'm more on Andrew's side. It's an impression. Michael Higgins is the writer of this, and he does have experience. He's been the letterer on several of our issues, and now he's the writer for this issue, and somebody else letters it for some reason. I don't know why. Augustin Maas, who like Michael Higgins knows how to letter things. He's been the letterer, but he gets promoted to writer for one issue, and then there's a guest letterer, and it's weird. Ron Lim's done a fill-in issue. His artwork is much better here. I love Ron Lim's artwork in this. I think Ron Lim, who again is from when he was on before, when we talked about him before, it's one of my favorite artists. He does some very
pretty hair in this issue.
Yeah,
he's true.
He's got this is him trying to figure out these characters, and I think he probably drew this and had time to draw it, and they were like, we'll publish it whenever we publish it, as opposed to that last time where he was like, we need you to be done with this tomorrow. So there are things I like, but so much of it felt like I didn't like Kitty's character. I didn't like Megan's character. I didn't like Brian's character. I thought he was a jerk the wrong way. This felt like somebody doing an impression of Claremont, and it also felt like someone doing an impression of Silver Age Marvel.
Can I ask a question about Brian's characterization? Because I do, like, to me, as a post-colonialist, the idea that Captain Britain's main character trait is that he sucks is kind of appealing. Like, I enjoy the fact that it seems like Captain Britain's whole deal is that he's bad.
Yes.
But I was a bit surprised that was the case. So is he in the midst of an arc where he sucks less, or is he
he's
a jerk all the way
suck
through?
less.
Okay.
He's a complicated jerk. See, that's the thing. He's a
traumatized.
Jerk. So he's a jerk. He's an asshole dealing. Okay, so for backstory, because we haven't mentioned this on our show in a while. At this point in time, Brian just saw his twin sister murdered on international television like 3 months.
Yikes.
Okay, like he's and having had lots of superhero trauma before that broke him. He just becomes massively broken. He becomes
relevant to Ash's question, like he specifically had trauma related to his obligations as kind of the Captain Britain character, right?
Okay.
Like he sort of died and got resurrected because he has to be Captain Britain, and he's also got this thing where he's like actually a scientist but has to take on this like traditional
Superhero
masculine
role,
role, which isn't necessarily what he wants to do.
Yes.
So he does have a complicated backstory, which it is lost.
He is
in
very
this issue.
broken.
He
He is a very broken man. Broken so much so that he becomes a jerk. He becomes an alcoholic. He becomes an abusive boyfriend, and he is a jerk. But Brian's not stupid, and this book made him look stupid, and it made him look stupid in a way like he's an asshole. He's not an idiot, and that bugged me because it cheapened the complicated character that I enjoy hating. And there's a lot of like very quick. I mean, so Meggan says, for instance, at one point, "Oh, Courtney Ross is like she'll probably be fat or something." Like it's very cheap writing, like 60s comics. It's writing like Silver Age comic by somebody writing in the 90s who's not good at doing either of those things, at least not for this issue.
I think maybe what I should have said is that it like reads to me like an Excalibur pastiche, like almost like it's a comedy version of it that's sort of a parody. And I think I like enjoy it on that level. Like, I mean, everything that you're saying is completely true, and I don't think the hystericalness of Meggan is defensible on any level. But at the same time, like I always like have an affection for this one just as I don't know, it just reads sort of like a parody fan fiction or something to me. And I don't include it in my mind like within the continuity of it, and yet I'm sort of like, I don't know. I almost like the Silver Aginess of it. It's like when people do those covers of like a modern comic but do it up in Silver Age style, and like that's amusing, even though it can be politically problematic. And I think that that's where some of my enjoyment of this issue comes from, because it's just like every single beat of this is like bonkers. Meggan attacking Demon Druid, and she's like, "I'm gonna be Godzilla now," and I'm like, that's terrible if we're gonna read it on a deep character level of Meggan.
Because I
and
really
yet
am a monster.
that's also really funny though.
But there's no self-awareness to it though, right? So how can you read it as pastiche without self-awareness?
I
Unless
guess,
I'm missing it.
yeah.
I mean, I don't know that I could again, because I'm not that familiar with the series. I don't know how much I can tell how self-aware it is. I mean, certainly, the Godzilla thing, but also the let me slip into something more comfortable, a like bikini with a cape is a very like that moment has a very old-timey feel to it.
I thought all women slept in that. What are you talking about? Isn't that normal? If I've only read 60s romance comics, I believe that's it.
Well, can I come back to you, Asha, about some of the love triangle dynamic and sort of its relation to romance tropes? Because we haven't talked about sort of the romance elements of Excalibur in a while. Like, arguably, I think it's because Crosstime Caper is like more concerned with sex than romance. And one of the things that I think can be really productive about sort of merging romance and superhero comics is that you have a possibility to potentially complicate or subvert both of them. The addition of something domestic and connotatively feminine into a traditionally masculine space can do certain things for us. And the addition of women who have superpowers and kick butt into like a space that sometimes but not always presents women in very sort of traditional roles. I don't want to say that romance always does that, because romance is really complicated, but at the very least doesn't usually although there are subgenres of sort of supernatural romance and stuff these days that do that, but at least in the 80s didn't usually include superpowered women, right? So we still have, a subversion of that just on that basic level, right? So I was curious, Asha, like, did you see sort of like tropes of the romance genre in this comic that surprised you or interested you? Is that part of what you're kind of responding to with the Meggan thing? Like, does it seem like something you recognized from other types of stories, or was it something that surprised you in this comic?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that the part of the appeal for X-Men for me has always been that element to it. There's always romance in X-Men. So I wasn't surprised that that was also the case in Excalibur. I found this particular love triangle, or I guess square, not the most exciting, because it seemed to me that the dynamics were too obviously the trope of, I love this woman who is in love with a man who's so kind of comically bad for her. So I found, I like feeling sympathetic toward both Meggan and Kurt was a bit hard, because both of them are behaving, at least in this issue, in such kind of overtly self-defeating ways.
Yeah, I mean, that's
so. I mean, it is one of the most classic romance tropes: the love triangle, the woman who's in love with the bad man. But I didn't find this version of it an exceptionally interesting version, at least in this issue.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how did you feel like the superpowers kind of played into it? Like, were you able to get any sense of the ways that they impact that story? I mean, did it just not make it interesting at all because the ways that the superpowers were mobilized just kind of fed into the trope? I mean, I'm curious about some of the body stuff that goes on with Meggan here and kind of some of the visual depictions of her. We have her depicted overtly monstrous in a way that we haven't had in Excalibur sort of for a while. And then we also, I am interested in the scene where she yells at Kurt too, in the sense that here's my minor defense of it. We haven't seen this dynamic with Meggan and Kurt before where we see her being afraid of what he represents for her. She's presented as like a fear of something she would become here because he is a monster all the time and he can't change that appearance, right? And I see Meggan's fear of that being reflected here in a way that I find interesting, and then she lashes out at him and we get his like very tragic reaction to that, and that is a dynamic that we don't see explored throughout Excalibur that I think is an actually interesting element of their relationship that I would have loved to see explored more. And I'm not saying it's explored well here, but just sort of like that element of it interests me.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I agree there.
Yeah, I mean, I particularly, that is, the super aspect was the thing that elevated it a bit, because I do think that the idea that her physical body reflects her emotional space, I did think that was cool. I think it's interesting that her first monstrous form is like the rock-faced guy from the Fantastic Four, whose name I forgot.
Like the Thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like the Thing, but with hairy elbows. Like, I thought that was an interesting choice of representation, especially that one frame where she's kind of the Thing with hairy elbows, but great, what an incredible figure, like the way that there was a kind of mashing together of her kind of sense of herself as monstrous, but also her or the way that she forms herself into a kind of traditionally attractive feminine shape as well. So I did think that when she was flying away and you saw those things combined on one body, I did think that was representationally very interesting. Because I guess based on this issue, I did assume, in fact, that the comic explored her ambivalence more. Because I do, like, it's definitely not even subtext, but straight text that her reaction against Kurt is about him being, like, this is where I got the Groucho Marx thing from. Her reaction to him is based on the fact that his monstrosity in her eyes is a reflection of her own. But it's also it's also clear that she is attracted to monstrosity as well. Her kind of feeling about herself and her feeling about other people who appear in this kind of non-normative way is fundamentally ambivalent, isn't just a straightforward disgust. Like, she does feel a certain attraction to the big blue guy who appears. When she refers to him as virile, like, it was very clear that she was into it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Oh man, and he's like sort of, this is going too far with it, but yeah, he's like Blue Brian, isn't he? Like Demon Druid in this comic.
Oh, no.
I'm going too far with it, but it occurred to me as you were saying that.
I mean, you could then argue that he's a bit like half Brian, half Nightcrawler.
I know, but I think it's going too far with it, but it did occur to me. Because it's not like he has any, like, similarities on a character level.
Right. But physically, yeah, like, so, physically, he is also doesn't look like a human because he's not. And that immediately does appeal to her, even if she's afraid of it.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you're saying about the ambivalence. Like, I mean, I totally get, Andrew, like, everything that you're complaining about with Meggan here, but I just still, like, I'm gonna defend that moment of ambivalence as being interesting and something that we don't always get with the, as Asha said, like, the quadrangle or whatever love thing that we have here, because I still wish that we'd had some of her feelings about desiring Kurt and being repelled by Kurt explored more. And yeah, like, that element of her being repelled by him is something that I think is the main thing I remember about this issue, and I kind of put a lot of the other stuff to the side because, like, I don't want to think about things I don't like. I don't know. You can respond to that or not. Yeah.
I will say Asha's point, the way she is breaking down her impression of this standalone issue, do sort of lend a little credence to Anna's claim that this is like it's trying to be a greatest hits of the early days. Because even just the things that you said in your analysis, you talked about romance comics, you talked about the monstrous feminine, which we've literally done episodes about each of that, one with Sydney and with Sam with Sam. We did episodes literally about those two things. And if that's translating to Asha 30 years later, then it is there, right? Like, they are clearly trying to pull on those same themes. I just think it's kind of an inferior version of what we've just spent 20 issues watching. I think that if she's picking up those things, then based on like the episodes we did with Sydney, the episodes we did with Sam on romance comics, on monstrous comics, those themes are translating across 30 years, so that's something, I guess.
Well, can I ask Asha about her read on Kurt in this issue? Since, that I have the thing for him. And anyway, but yeah, he is weird in this comic because he's being a little bit more of the nice guy trope than I think he often is in Excalibur. And I've got feelings about that. I've complained vociferously about Mav comparing him to Ducky in a previous episode, although I don't think that's completely an invalid comparison. I just really don't want him to be Ducky, like as in Pretty in Pink Ducky. But I was curious about your response to it. As someone who I know knows some of these romance tropes and stuff, were you getting kind of that nice guy vibe from him? I mean, did you like him in this issue, or was he just a total tool in this issue to you?
I did like him in this issue. I mean, I also have a soft spot for Nightcrawler, like not nearly on the same scale that you have. But the X-Men film where he was where his character was introduced, that's like one of my favorite ones, and I do genuinely really like him as a character. I think that in this issue, I don't think he crosses the line for me into nice guy territory. I mean, I think that because I do think that I think it's important when we're talking about the nice guy trope to be careful that we don't just label anyone who has an unrequited crush and is sad about it as a nice guy. Like, I mean, it's certainly possible to have that kind of pining that coexists with friendship in a way that doesn't feel manipulative, which is I think the aspect that makes the nice guy trope so dangerous. He's trying to help her. He, is not in this issue exceptionally good at it. It's certainly not anyone's favorite thing to hear when they're freaking out that they're not being rational. So he doesn't have a particularly strong approach in terms of helping her deal with her like intense emotional moment, but he does come across as well-meaning as opposed to trying to kind of use her bad relationship for his own ends.
Yeah, I mean, I was curious about how he would read to everybody in this issue, just because he doesn't read as out of character to me in this issue, but definitely sort of more involved with Meggan's sort of emotional state than he often is, because he's often more of a backseat with it, with just the odd sort of moment. But I don't know, did the rest of you have thoughts about it? Because we talked about this sort of tendency with Kurt in the past and whether we read him as manipulative in this triangle or not. And Andrew, maybe I'll go to you because we haven't heard from you for a while.
I don't know. I think for me, one of the issues I'm having just in terms of creating continuity with the earlier element, the idea that a lot of Kurt and Meggan's relationship has been specifically about Meggan becoming like Kurt physically and emotionally to some extent, and that sort of like literal shape shifting. The idea that she would, as you kind of suggested, Anna, see that as something horrible that he is, poisoning her with. I kind of hate that, but I also see how that kind of works with Meggan's previously established continuity as someone who was raised basically as like a hideous werewolf that everyone was afraid of. So there's ways in which I think it can work. I don't know how far we're reaching to make it work. But I don't know, as you said, I do think there's something there that's interesting to explore.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested on the level of, because I complained back in the thing about rapist Nazi Nightcrawler about how I thought that was a bit of a misunderstanding of like how he's approaching the Meggan relationship, because he's looking for romantic validation, but I think he's just also looking for validation, because I mean, to see something of himself reflected in her, like literally in terms of her transforming into him. But I mean, also, I talked a little bit before about, my ideal read of how you can make this relationship interesting would be that he has a fascination with shapeshifters. And, his mother is a shapeshifter. He doesn't know that yet, but, it's something he's shown an interest in the past. The first time he meets her, he's fascinated, right? So, I mean, looking for validation in terms of like, if she would choose monstrousness as a way to present herself, how validating would that be for him in terms of his self-acceptance, right? And the fact that she rejects that very vociferously here in a way that is just so heartbreaking. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of potential interest there. And I see what you're saying, Andrew, that it's kind of awful for her to reject him on that level, but I also find it believable given what her story is. And then I find his sort of attraction to the idea of her sort of believable on that level of like, does she reject her monstrous? Does she not reject her monstrous? And he's trying to figure that out, which is a reflection of him. And it is like potentially the nice guy trope, but like, I think it's more complicated than that because of his difference and kind of some of that affecting it beyond kind of concerns of gender. I mean, everything's always bound up in gender or sex or whatever. And yet there's an added component of this here with Kurt's fascination that I think is potentially interesting. And you're absolutely right that I'm reading way too much into this. I'm fan fictioning this issue to make it work.
But
And that is 100% true.
This
issue is fanfic. I mean, this issue, you said it, this issue reads like someone inserting a story into their favorite Excalibur arc a year later, which is what this is. It's a year after it should have been, and someone went and inserted, here's what I think was happening in Harry Potter behind the scenes, right? Like that's what this is. And like I don't think it's the worst thing ever. I just think it's weird. Like we've read other comics that I've been like, we have other episodes of our show where I've been much harsher on the writing than I'm being on Higgins here. It feels like an impression more than a story.
Right. And I mean, I do think that as I was reading it, when I read it the first time, there were a lot of little threads where I was like, I have no idea where this thread leads. So, which is why I felt the need to do some extra Googling. And so when I did read Meggan's backstory, because she was a character I wasn't familiar with, like the fact that she's supposed to have grown up like Romany and as a werewolf child, like that combination, I think really increased my interest in her character arc too, because it's the idea of her being an outsider amongst outsiders. Like the degree to which she's alienated from society is very, very layered. So I think that the fact that she finds embracing her monstrosity so difficult makes a lot more sense to me with that kind of contextualization. But of course, that is necessarily a kind of contextualization that the issue isn't giving me, that I'm forcing into the issue.
Yeah, because I mean, just the way that it's presented here, it is kind of a very generic woman is hysterical about being jealous of her guy and everything, and that's not speaking to that complexity that you're bringing up, right, where she has this physical difference, she has a racial difference, she has an ethnic difference, and she has all these levels. I mean, this is a character who's like been in a concentration camp before, right? She has a really interesting backstory, and that's not necessarily at play here unless we choose to read that into it.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the other complications too that's directly relevant to this issue is the extent to which Kurt is complicit in Brian's affair.
Yeah.
We've talked about that before. And like, honestly, the situation in this issue, I don't understand. I don't know how you could have Brian openly cheating on Meggan, coming back and hanging out and living with her, surrounded by her friends. Like, I believe in a real world scenario, Brian would absolutely get his ass kicked by every member of Excalibur for anything close to that.
Do you read this as Meggan found out for sure that Brian was cheating here? Or see, this reads like she knows. Oh God, Brian's been cheating on me with Courtney, and that was bad. Yeah. She doesn't know. Like in the context of the story, I don't know if she ever knows. She's jealous of Courtney, but she thinks she's being irrational. She doesn't know
What?
Brian's actually having an affair.
I think she knows. I think it's strongly suggested she knows in some of the earlier issues.
Yes.
That's very confusing.
Right.
Because
but here,
It really
she's
is.
looking at them. She's watching them kiss.
yeah.
And she says, I can't bear to watch anymore. And then he comes home later. So
Yeah.
she knows.
You couldn't
We
miss
know
it.
that Kurt knows. That Brian told Kurt because he's an idiot. I don't like, so we know Kurt knows. And why? And Kurt has his moments here where he's thinking, you don't deserve a problem like Brian. Why won't she just leave him? Ducky or no, right? At some point, you've got to tell the girl, look, he's cheating on you. Let it go. Let him go. Kick him out, right? Because it feels weird. And it feels weird for Brian to know, for Kurt to know, for Meggan to know, and frankly, probably Rachel and Kitty know.
Oh, they absolutely do.
Well,
It's
right.
not. It's not even implied. It's there.
Yeah.
So now I'm kind of infinitely more confused because based on just
not
reading this issue,
Right.
I assumed that what was the case is that she and Brian were not in a serious relationship.
Oh no, they live together.
Yep. They're
That is
partners.
wild.
That is his live.
Yeah.
That is his live-in girlfriend. Brian's big struggle at this point is I am very sick of my needy superhero girlfriend, so I'm going to go hang out with my supermodel banker girlfriend. That's where Brian's headspace is right now.
Oh, that's a hard yikes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
like,
the big round bed in the scene where like one of the
Yeah.
scenes where Kurt and Meggan are talking, that's Meggan and Brian's bed.
Oh
Right?
no.
Can I request that "that's a hard yikes" be one of the pull quotes for our Twitter account?
Absolutely. Okay, one PR manager Kurt note. I can see how he's like in a bit of a difficult position here though, because if he does tell like Meggan about the affair, isn't he being almost more of a nice guy? Because that actually seems manipulative for him to be the one telling her.
No, that's an obligation as a friend.
Yeah.
point, yeah, I
True,
mean,
that's true.
well, in that, I get you're saying he's conflicted because he doesn't want to be the one to break them up because he wants her, and yeah, I get that. But she's watching them. He knows that she knows. There's no secrets anymore at this point.
Yeah.
They all know. So I don't.
It's emotional
know.
torture at this point.
Yeah, and it feels uncomfortable to me in a way that. Yeah.
I was just going to say that it does make me less sympathetic to Kurt's character because he does kind of early on suggest that she is being irrational. He does say, "Oh, I'm
yeah,
sure
that
it's
is
fine."
bad. Oh.
So the
Yeah.
fact that he has that line, like
Yeah.
that line, made me assume that he
Oh,
didn't know.
I thought the
So
irrational
That
line
is
was about her, but I think he's saying you're not being rational when you're saying that you're ugly and it's your fault and blah blah blah.
no, but he says something about it's, oh, I'm sure it's nothing. Like he does say something that suggests that she's overreacting to he literally does say, but maybe you're overreacting.
Yeah, that's weird because
that's kind of
he
how
totally
I
knows
read
Brian.
it too.
Yeah, he totally knows
That's
Brian's cheating.
gaslighting.
Yeah,
Oh,
Brian. Not
crap.
only does Kurt suspect, Kurt is the only one that Brian has told. I'm gonna go have an affair right now because Megan's too needy.
Oh, I failed as his PR manager.
Yeah,
I was
it's
blinded.
weird.
I was blinded by his sexy pajamas and I wanted to defend him, but he's just like digging a deeper and deeper hole in this conversation.
He does have sexy pajamas, though. We can all agree
They're
on that.
stranded buccaneer pajamas.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sexy pajamas. I mean, when Brian comes back, they're all just kind of hanging out in PJs because he's got his Buccaneers on, and Meggan is once again in one of the nighties that she
Hangs out.
always sleeps in, and yet. Well, I mean, because again, this is that thing from before where Kurt's like, well, she doesn't really sleep in that. She's only doing that for Brian. As far as we know, she really does always sleep in these. Because that's how we always see her. So I don't know.
Let's talk about a different strand of romance, which is what happens with Kitty and Rachel in this issue. Because this, I think, is one of the most interesting things in this issue, is that it kind of seems like they're going on a date. And I was very intrigued by this, given I've complained in the past that some of the queer context with Kitty and Rachel is not as explicit as it could be. And we've talked about, obviously, the restrictions of the Comics Code and what they could get away with. And, this is a series where we had Kitty stepping completely inside Rachel and everybody getting cream pied, so it's not like this hasn't been there.
Right.
But at the same time, they're going on a date, right? Like, I mean, Asha, I was curious about you reading it because you don't have all of this kind of fan-in context that, like, we have for approaching these two characters. Did it seem quite queer to you, or was that something that sort of didn't stand out to you about this issue?
So it didn't stand out to me. I think that might be because my perception was that Kitty is a child and that Rachel is an adult.
Yeah.
Is Rachel an adult?
They're
Narrowly, but yeah.
Rachel's like 18, maybe 19. Kitty's like 15, maybe
Okay.
16. So they are, yes, technically, but they're close enough that they could reasonably be dating. It's
Okay,
like-
okay.
And when they met, Rachel would have been underage. When they met, Rachel would have been 16 and Kitty would have been 14.
Okay, because I think I perceived Rachel as more in the kind of 25 range. I thought of this as a sort of I read much more of a kind of big sister vibe, especially because I fully didn't understand what happened at the bar. Like, they open the door and they look really shocked, but then when you look inside, it looks incredibly banal.
Yeah, I don't know either. And I've read this many
I mean,
times.
there's a pentagram on the ceiling, but
Right, but
other
I mean,
than that, definitely banal,
yeah.
which is a weird juxtaposition.
Okay. Let's do this here, because I don't know that I think it's a date so much as I think it could be read as a date, but also they are good friends. It could just be read as, you know what? Let's go out and hang out at a pub without the boys. It would be nice to go and get away. So I could believe that. It is weird because the only thing that I can tell is weird about this bar or problematic about this bar at all is that there is a pentagram on the ceiling.
Exactly.
And okay, oh hell, witchcraft. And okay, at this point, they're not at Inferno yet. They can't be, or maybe they are, but Ilyana is Kitty's best friend. Kitty's literal best friend in the world is a demon sorceress from another dimension
Right.
who deals in black magic. She cannot possibly
With
be freaked out by a pentagram.
specifically. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, I read it as kind of like they go into this bar and they're like, this is a creepy dive bar of the wrong variety, and I don't want to be in this bar in my slinky cocktail dress, and we need to
superheroes.
leave.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess.
That doesn't mean you want to hang around with those
No,
people.
Fair.
No, I mean, is that what's happening? Because I thought they were scared, and if Kitty's scared, I'm like, you've been to space. What are you doing?
I definitely like read it from a female experience perspective of like, I've been in this situation
Oh,
before
sure.
where you're all dressed up and like you go in the wrong bar and you're like, shit, no way, we are not hanging out
You think
here.
it's just gross dudes? Okay, if it's gross dudes, then I buy it. But I just thought
But
the bar
here's-
was supposed to be scary.
But here's my queer context reading of it. They're going out together, and like Rachel's always dressed sexy, and like Kitty is not, but that's still very Kitty. They're going to a place called the Witchery, which they expect to be one thing, and then it's filled with creepy dudes. So it kind of seems like they were looking for a certain kind of bar,
Sure.
and this isn't the certain kind of bar. So
Sure.
like it's pretty easy to queer code this.
Well, that's true. Although, to kind of speak to why I read it in this big sister, little sister way, Rachel drags her away in an incredibly momly way.
Yeah.
Like, she's holding her arm. Kitty's kind of like,
Yeah.
looks like she's gonna throw herself to the ground in the grocery store. Like, her body
Yeah.
posture is incredibly unsexy.
This is true. And I mean, one of the things with the Kitty Rachel relationship too is that Rachel does often call Kitty kiddo, like in kind of a
Yeah.
motherly way. And I think that that can interfere with queer readings of these characters because even though they are very close in age technically, there can be a hierarchy between them that I find can interfere with it in Excalibur. And I think that's a fair criticism to make.
I also think, though, that Rachel does that on purpose, right? I have always read it that way because, so even if I don't assume a queer relationship between them, if I am reading this at this point, I know that Rachel's only 2 years older than Kitty, maybe. So to me, the kiddo thing is I'm gonna like not belittle you like she doesn't like her, but like she is putting Kitty in her I'm grown up and you're not kind of place. I think she intentionally says that to make herself seem more mature.
Yeah.
Because frankly, Rachel's not. Like, Kitty is by far more mature than Rachel is, even with that 2-year age difference.
There's also a pretty big metatextual thing happening here, too. This is about Claremont. She says, if the things that freaky writer told me about this place are true, and then they go to a witchcraft place. Claremont was known to practice Wicca.
Yeah.
And he was known for being, well, freaky, for lack of a better term. Higgins has been working with Claremont for a long time.
Yeah.
I'm envisioning a scenario where Claremont brought Higgins out to something, and Higgins decided to include it in this issue.
So you think he just wrote a real life event?
100%, yeah.
But I mean, queer context again, he also knew that Claremont had an affection for wanting to pair those two characters up.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Oh, interesting. This is not precisely on the queer reading, but it is about Rachel. Is there a backstory to her like clavicle spikes, or the way the way that her costume has those spikes?
There is indeed. So so she is the alternate universe daughter of Cyclops and Jean Grey. And so she's from the Days of Future Past reality. In that reality, she was turned into what's called a mutant hound, in which she was psychologically and physically manipulated, tortured, and made to hunt down other mutants. And this is a sort of redux of the costume that she was made to wear as a hound. That costume is black, this costume is red. So it has to do with kind of her trauma, and we've talked about it on the pod before, as there's an armoredness to her, and sort of her trying to live through that trauma and her trying to deal with that. So like it's bound up in that. I won't like prescribe a specific reading of it, but it's bound up in that for sure.
Okay,
Also, BDSM is cool, and that's why they did it.
Yeah.
That's also part of why I think. But yeah, dual layered meaning, I think.
Fair. There's a lot going on. I mean, one other like queer context thing is just the scene where Kitty is working on the device back at the lighthouse after the initial encounter with Demon Druid. We get a really interesting panel where like Rachel says, "It's times like this that it's difficult to resist the urge to read her thoughts, but I can't. I have to respect her privacy." And that is way more kind of emotional than we usually see Rachel in terms of her interactions with Kitty. So I just just wanted to bring it up. This is, I think, for me, one of the aspects of this comic that I found the most redeemably interesting. But anyway.
Although on a kind of queer point, coming at it a bit sideways, I do think the fact that Kitty penetrates Demon Druid and that makes her understand him better was an interesting moment from a kind of sexual symbolism point of view. Like the fact that he has this very like ecstatic face when she phases through him. That to me in some ways was kind of the queerest moment that I picked up on.
That is an interesting panel because their faces parallel each other too, and they're making the same expression. So they're like physically merged in some sense.
And I think Lim is Lim almost certainly is trying to do the kinds of experimentation with sexual metaphor that Davis does. Like I do think that's intentional. I don't want to leave the scene where Kitty's tinkering just yet, because I do think some other important stuff happens there.
Sure,
which
go ahead.
Is your point. The thing that you're pointing out when you say you're reading it as sort of a, I mean, I get why you're reading it as sort of a queer metaphor there, and I buy it. It's one of the things that I didn't like before because I wasn't reading it that way. I just read this entire 2-page sequence as overwritten, again, trying to do the 60s thing too much, where everybody has to explicitly thought balloon their personal trauma. Because I saw Rachel do that, and then you see Kurt saying, "Oh, she's going right to Brian after all the hell that he put her through," and then Brian does the romance comic thing of he's just mean for no reason. He storms off and then slams the door. I don't know why. He just got laid. He should feel calm. you know, like I have no idea what's going on here. And then Kitty has her thoughts that she's she doesn't know why she's tinkering. She just is. I don't know why she's tinkering either. It doesn't it's not explained later, so I don't know.
The gadget makes no sense.
Yeah, but all of it's just like sort of I want to make sure that I do the internal monologue for every character, and then we get Meggan, then we get Kurt again. Like it came across as very weird to me, so that's why I blew it off. But if I isolate just the Rachel one, I think I see your point.
Yeah, I mean, I should have opened my argument for why this issue, I don't want to say good, but like appeals to me, because it's like a Silver Age Excalibur issue. If Excalibur had been written in the Silver Age, this is what it would be. And I think I'm responding to that because I love Silver Age goofiness. And like, anyway. Let's talk a little bit about the villain as like kind of our last kind of thing. So Demon Druid and why he's great. And I'm saying that kind of as a question, but kind of as a statement, because I don't know, we haven't had a lot of real like villains of the week in Excalibur, really. We've had like such interconnected stories that kind of build. I mean, we have had that in terms of the Crosstown Caper, but even then it's usually sort of across a couple of issues or something. But this is like a true villain of the week. And I was curious about our responses to that. How do we think about the villain of the week sort of as a storytelling convention? Is it a storytelling convention that's effective in terms of those things that we expect villains to do. Like we've talked in previous episodes about a villain should help us understand the heroes better. And like, does this villain help us understand the heroes better? And I'll come to you first, Asha, about it. I mean, you're new to these characters. Pretty much everybody is new to Demon Druid. This is like his second comic book appearance,
I want to go
think.
last.
But like, did he help us understand the characters at all here? Like, was his presence in the narrative effective on any level?
Well, okay, I'll start off to say that I do like villain of the week vibes. I mean, I like Star Trek. I like that kind of revolving feeling that you get with certain kinds of storytelling. And I do think that he played into the themes pretty well. Like, I think that, one, I really enjoyed his character design. I thought that his luscious locks were wonderful. I also found his powers kind of hilarious. But I do think that what he does is, you know, we already talked a little bit about how he has a certain kind of monstrosity that Meggan is attracted to, but also fears. We also get the way that he kind of brings around the theme of things are not always what they seem, don't judge a book by its cover, etc. The way that the actual solution is this plot twist. We can just, you know, open a door for him and let him out, and we don't have to fight him at all. So I thought that fit with the theme that seems to me pretty prevalent in this comic around people who can look scary but are actually normal beings trying to get by, even if they come across as aggressive. So I mean, I do think that he kind of served as a useful parallel to most of the other characters.
Yeah, other thoughts on Demon Druid? I like that. Yeah.
Well, maybe just to add on to that, I think one of the things that he brought out in this narrative in particular was exactly as Asha said, the contrast between Brian's approach and Phoenix's approach. And we've talked before about who's the real leader of Excalibur, and we've also entertained the theory that a lot of them are humoring Brian. And I loved how quickly and easily Rachel dropped him.
Yeah, that was very
after
enjoyable.
The cover, you know, promise of this big fight, and it's just like, no, sit down. And she takes him out. And Demon Druid gave us kind of a good excuse to explore that, both as an ideological question and as a question of, you know, who is the real power in Excalibur.
Yeah, and I mean, even the dialogue of the face-off that they have there. There's no way I'm going to let a child stop me, humiliate me. I am a child of the stars.
Yeah.
Forget the speeches and get out of my way, or else don't even try. And then, yeah, just easily drops him. I mean, yeah, seeing like Rachel face up against sort of a cosmic being like Demon Druid, who like, I think he's technically an Eternal or something. He has like a complicated, like, yeah.
So the first time I read this, I looked at this. I mean, I remember when this book came out, and I was like, why is this guy? This is clearly the Magus, Adam Warlock villain, but he's not. And it's weird because Ron Lem's drawn the Magus before, and he draws him exactly like that. Yeah. It really looks, it's basically the same costume. It should be a lightning bolt instead of a constellation. And other than that, Ron Lem's version of Magus looks very much like this. So that confused me at first. But I never bothered to read the original Demon Druid story until this morning. When I was like, you know what? I've got Marvel Comics Unlimited now, something that I did not have access to when this comic came out in 1990. So I don't have to go track down Thor number 209. I can just go read it right now. So I did that today. And it's this story. It's exactly this story. I mean, like, to say that this story is written is generous. What actually happened? What actually happened is they took the Thor plot and they inserted Excalibur in it instead of Don Blake. So in the original story, it's not exactly the same because they tried to get the Excalibur sort of drama going on and like their subplots and everything. But the original story is Don Blake, who is he is the secret identity of Thor, and whether they're the same character or not is sort of weirdly ambiguous at this point in continuity. But Don Blake is looking for the Lady Sif. And so as Thor, he flies to England. He thinks maybe she's there. She's not, but he thinks maybe she's there. Mostly it was that Jerry Conway apparently wanted to like write really badly stereotypical accents. It's bad. But there's a lot of governor and cheerio mate type stuff. And so Thor goes there, turns into Don Blake, and is just hanging out at a pub when the Demon Druid attacks, or sort of. The Demon Druid's walking to Stonehenge, and so Thor goes to attack him, and they fight a bunch. And then this Scotland Yard detective, because of course there's a Scotland Yard detective because it's in Britain, you see. The Scotland Yard detective realizes that, wait a minute, the Demon Druid's not actually attacking anybody. He's mostly just walking. So they let him walk. It's like, no, stop fighting him. It turns out he's just trying to get home. So they let him walk into Stonehenge, and he walks into Stonehenge and raises his arms up, and then the magic power of Stonehenge beams him back to his home reality. And that's the end of the story. Much like what happened here.
Yeah.
But, with different interpersonal drama. But it's really exactly this story. And I didn't know that until I bothered to read it again today. It's very much a ripoff, which makes me, I don't know what's going on here. Like Higgins it's not a sequel, because the druid in this story sort of is appearing for the first time, but it references it, which is why I knew how to go find it, right? So it's not like, he has already gone home. It's very bizarre. It was a weird choice, and I don't know what he was going for, other than I imagine Michael Higgins said, I read this story back when I was a kid, and I want my own shot at it, so I'm going to just do it again.
Well, yeah, again, that fan fiction-y element. But I mean, you've said in the past, Mav, that like a villain is whatever you need for that particular story.
Yeah, and it really is. Like, I think he had some drama that he wanted to do, and this was the convenient story, so he just dropped it into a plot. It really does read like that.
And it's a character
which is
with
an
nebulous
interesting choice.
powers that can like do different things depending on
That
what we
no
need
one
him
cares
to do,
about.
right? Yeah.
No one has seen him at this point. Nobody had seen him in 30 years, and we're never going to mention him again. So it's fine. It's just like, yeah, let's just do this.
I guess the other kind of useful thing maybe that he does is he has that line about how Kitty but he senses something special in her about the greatness men might achieve. Like, that seemed to me to be an obvious bit of foreshadowing. I don't know what foreshadowing, but it seemed like on his way out he had to toss a little plot in there.
I mean, certainly, like, in a general sense, Kitty is often sort of set up as like the next generation leader of the X-Men, so that could be a little aside to that. But any final thoughts? Because like I think that was like probably as much attention as like Demon Druid deserves as a character. But any things that anybody else is like desperate to talk about?
He apparently has more appearances. I just googled him. I've got to go. I'm going to collect all of the Demon Druid issues. That's like that's my new thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I read his backstory and everything in time for the episode, so he does have like a bunch of other things going on. Like,
shows up in Wonder Man. Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, like he's marooned in the past and then becomes like a god of people, and this is the Stonehenge thing. Anyway, doesn't make a lot of sense, but like anyway.
No. In terms of the just like last thing that we want to say, I did think it was kind of hilarious that the two characters who are introduced in the beginning are purposefully made so annoying that once they get turned into rocks, you don't care. I mean, you couldn't have put sympathetic characters in that position, because then you'd spend the rest of the story being like, are they going to stop being rocks? But you don't mind because they're very annoying.
But it's a nice vision of where a toxic relationship takes you into the future of your marriage, right?
That's true, but like that's making me think it's even like more smart than it is, because that's another like parallel. I don't know if that's serving your argument or undercutting it, Andrew, that this issue
undercutting,
is
definitely, yeah.
I don't know. Any final thoughts from you, Andrew?
No, I think you've sold me on a few aspects of this issue that I was maybe
No. I don't have to.
I still don't like
it.
the Meggan portrayal, but I think there's definitely some interesting ideas in play.
Mav, final thoughts?
I don't love this book. It's not offensive to me. Some issues of Excalibur greatly offend me. Nazis, like it's not. I don't find it offensive. I find it kind of it's a fill-in issue. Like that's what it's for. It did its job of filling in a month where they just didn't want to skip things. This is a thing that Marvel and DC Comics used to do. We were behind. We've got to catch up. Just toss a guest team out there and get something publishable that we can just kind of burn a month on. And it was fine for that. And I think like Andrew, you've convinced me that there are things that show merit. We didn't talk much about it, but I love everyone's sexy pajamas in this. I mean, I like Kurt has two different sets of pajamas. He's got like the Vin Diesel-esque wife beater outfit at the beginning, and then he's got like the Buccaneer one later. And And I actually do love Satyr Courtney's, you know, I'm going to seduce Brian outfit. Like I think that
Is
Ron
it a
Lim is
seduction outfit though? Because it feels like it's a done deal at that point.
no,
Yeah.
it is a done deal, but like I like I like Ron Lim as an artist.
Yeah.
So what I like about this issue is that he was clearly given the time to explore his vision of what these characters might be,
Yeah.
rather than, like, I seriously feel the last time he did it, he was told to draw 22 pages in 24 hours.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, it really felt rushed. It felt like a 24-hour comic. Like, you got 24 straight hours to finish this job. And here I felt like he could spend his time, and I recognize who characters are supposed to be. It's like, oh, you've got, this is not Alan Davis's take on what Nightcrawler looks like, but I get what you're doing. I get what you're doing with Meggan. I get what you're doing with Brian. So I do appreciate things about this.
Ooh, that has reminded me of one like portrayal of Nightcrawler thing that I wanted to point out that I thought was interesting, which is the panel where he's in bed thinking about Meggan. In that picture, he looks like Burt Reynolds. Like, he doesn't look like Nightcrawler. I think there's something interesting about the fact that his hands are under the pillow. You can't see his tail. You can't see his feet. It's like it's all blue, so you can't tell that he has blue skin. So there is something kind of strangely normalizing of him in that moment, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, this is too big of a thing for me to get into at the end of the episode, but I do have questions and issues about the way Kurt is sexy, like, in general, in terms of, like, is he sexy through his difference, or is he sexy in spite of his difference? So we brought this up sort of on past episodes, and something, obviously, this is me, we're going to bring it up again, but it is interesting when people kind of make him look more normal because he has to be sexier in that moment, and I have feelings about that, understandably. It is interesting that you brought up a Burt Reynolds comparison, though, since he has famously imitated Burt Reynolds in a comic in the past, which many of our listeners will already be aware of, but interesting thing to bring up.
Merlin, if only you're at my side, my old friend, to give me courage. There are no war tricks that will fool Mordred and Morgana. More than I ever did, I need you now. Where are you, Merlin? If only you could see me wield Excalibur once more.
I think we will wrap up there, other than to say, Asha, thank you so much again for joining us, and to ask whether you have work that you would like our listeners to check out, or if you would like them to find you online, where can they find you?
I generally don't need to be found, but I will plug the fact that I have a poetry chapbook that's out in the world called Mundane Majestic. It's about travel. I think it's pretty funny. So those are maybe slight overlaps with the topic of this podcast. So yeah, that poetry collection's out on Struther Press. And other than that, I try to avoid being seen on the internet.
Fair enough, Asha. Thank you so much for joining us. Next, in 1 week's time, we will be on to episode 22. We'll be back on the Crosstime Caper discussing Excalibur 21, Crusader X, featuring another brand new world chock full of brand new doppelgangers, and the debut of penciler Chris Wozniak, who will be doing a few issues of the series, so you better get used to it. As usual, we'll have a great guest to help us process it all. In the meantime, if you liked what you heard, please follow us, like, and review the podcast wherever you're listening to it or watching it. Don't forget to check out our fabulous YouTube videos, which you can find via our website or the Vox Popcast YouTube channel. As always, if you want to chat with us about Excalibur or pitch yourself as a guest for a future episode, let us know. You can reach out via our website, goshgollywow.com, where we've got some fun extras, and via Twitter at goshgollywow, where we post daily pages from whatever issue we're reading that week and more fun extras. Thank you, Andrew and Mav, for another transporting conversation. Thank you, Asha, for humoring our digressions. Thank you all for listening, and a special thanks to Maximilian of Thoughtform Music for our truly epic theme song. Play us out.